Hi guys, welcome back. So today we've got this MK7 Golf R in for a bunch of upgrades. It's a little bit different to what we usually do. Reason being is that it's got a hybrid turbo on it, but the customer's got a factory downpipe on it. So we can't really tune it too much because obviously we're limited by the restrictive downpipe. So it's only really sort of like a stage 1 software file with some other changes to it to obviously accommodate for the hybrid turbo. Before we get into it, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, also notification bell, and then you won't miss when any of our new videos go live. So yeah, something a little bit different. So we've got a custom ECU software going on this car. It's got a hybrid turbo, like a mild hybrid, and it's got the factory downpipe cat. We're going to be installing some hardware on it as well, like the 4-piece race line intake, so completely de-restricting the intake, and installing a Milltek catback exhaust for some sound and improve the rear end aesthetic, and also the Wagner tuning intercooler as well, so to keep everything cool, ready to go to stage 2, or even you would call it stage 3 a little bit later on. So we're going to get the car on a dyno, see what it's making as standard, because it's currently running standard ECU software with the hybrid turbo. And then we're going to bring the car in the workshop, walk you through all the parts, and then put the car back on the dyno, start tuning it, and see what power we make. Obviously we're going to be limited in the parameters we can change because of the factory downpipe with the EGTs and the back pressure. So we'll make sure we map it to a decent standard, so obviously make sure that it shouldn't cause any issues with the factory downpipe. But ideally on these cars, or any car with a hybrid turbo, you should be installing a high flow downpipe. So we'll see you in a little bit. Okay, so you've just seen the Golf R getting its baseline on a road run, where we measure the power and torque as the vehicle arrives, before later on measuring the final output once we've got all the upgrades fitted and the ECU and DSG software. So we've got the Golf R on the ramps behind me, and we've got all the parts that we're going to be fitting today out here in front of me. I'm just going to go walk through from right to left, or my right to left, of all the upgraded parts and talk you through them. So right here you've got the Milltek non-resonated catback exhaust system. So this particular customer opted for the non-res, so it's got straight through center silencer matching up to the factory downpipe, going to the rear silencer, which has the integration with the factory valves as well. So the factory valve controllers slip straight onto here, and you've got your factory valve control as the car, sort of like a ride review, so you still maintain all of that. And then you've got the polished circular tips as well to finish off the rear end aesthetic. So the exhaust tone is going to be a lot better, and then also the volume is going to be a bit louder as well. But obviously you've still got the valve control, so you can choose whether it's going to be loud or not. So just here in front of me, we've got the Haldex oil and the DSG seal filter and the DSG oil as well. So we usually go for the Motul DCTF because it's like a blend of oil as opposed to the factory oil, which is like a mineral oil. Use this on all of our track day cars and all of our usual DSG servicing. Works really nicely, a little bit higher performance. And the factory intervals for the servicing for the DSG is about 40,000 miles, and then for the Haldex on these cars is about 36 months. Something that we see neglected quite often. It leads to like mechatronic faults, so that's like the controller with the DSG, also the clutches and the gearbox internals as well. And on these cars they have a Haldex gauze, which essentially filters out the oil before it goes into the pump. And what happens is because it's a gauze and not a filter on these cars, they're not replaced, and it's not part of the service routine to clean them. What we usually do when we do the Haldex oil change is clean it as well, so make sure that the pump gauze is basically uninhibited flow wise. We see a lot of failures on these with people who don't bother or aren't aware of servicing the Haldex and cleaning the gauze. And then here we've got the Wagner tuning intercooler, so a higher performance intercooler than the standard one. It's got about 90% more volume. Obviously, if we're increasing the boost pressure, that's going to introduce more heat into the the charge cooling circuit, so this is going to help to remove that. Stage 1 cars don't really see a big benefit from installing an aftermarket intercooler, but it definitely gives you a good amount of headroom when it comes into a hotter climate to keep the power much more repeatable. So what happens is when the charge temperatures start to rise, the ECU automatically reduces reduces the output through changing various parameters. And what this intercooler or most aftermarket intercoolers allow you to do, or allow the ECU to do, is basically keep the engine operating in the higher output maps for longer. And then to finish the install off, we've got the racing line intake with the intake elbow and the turbo muffler delete. So the racing line R600 intake has an intake across the whole face of the car rather than using just half of the intake. So it's a lot higher volume of fresh air going into the intake, bigger intake filter, all CFD designed, much better than the standard item. You've got the turbo muffler delete, which replaces the factory turbo muffler, which is on the turbo outlet. And what that does is it unmuffles the turbo. You hear a lot more turbo noises and a little bit less resistance coming out of the turbo as well. And then the 90-degree elbow that you've got here, big restriction on the standard intake, which we'll show you a little bit later on. Once you've got this fitted, obviously better intake sound, boost response, a bit more power and torque as well. So we're going to get all these parts fitted to the car, show the differences between them as well, especially like with the intake, intercooler, intake elbow, turbo muffler delete, stuff like that. Once it's all fitted, we'll get the car on the dyno, and then we will show you the differences in the power and torque before and after, and show you the intake and exhaust sounds before and after as well. So hope you enjoy the rest of the video. Okay, so we're back on the dyno after tuning the MK7 Golf R with the RSS ECU software, DSG software, and installing all the upgrades as well. So just to recap on the upgrades, we've installed a full intake system, the Wagner intercooler, and a catback exhaust system. The customer didn't want to upgrade to an aftermarket downpipe at this time. Obviously this particular car, it's got a hybrid turbo on it, and also it had a turbo inlet hose as well. So we benchmarked the car this morning, came in at around 307 horsepower, 302 foot-pounds of torque, and we're just going to compare the graphs behind me. So the dotted lines, you've got the standard as the car arrived, and then the solid lines, you have the car as it leaves us now, with the red lines being the horsepower and the blue lines being the torque. So after all the tuning's complete, the car's making around 376 horsepower and 351 foot-pounds of torque. And then the maximum gains within the rev range, you're looking at about 65 horsepower at 6,200 RPM and about 55 foot-pounds of torque at 3,850. And this car is now making the standard peak horsepower at 4,600 RPM, so that's around 1,400 RPM sooner. It's now making peak power, and obviously everything above that is just pure gains. And then the vehicle's also making peak torque at 2,850 RPM, so that's 1,600 RPM sooner, so it's much sooner. So you get your peak horsepower and foot-pounds of torque on the standard car much earlier in the rev range, and you get to enjoy all the massive gains behind us. So this can be a night and day different car to drive. Obviously, ideally on the cars with the hybrid turbos, you want to be fitting like a sports cat or a catless downpipe, so we can optimize the software further. But to basically what you sacrifice with running a hybrid turbo with a factory downpipe is we have to limit the amount of boost that's produced, the amount of power, to obviously reduce the EGTs and any of the back pressure as well, which is why this particular car isn't seeing massive gains. So I hope you enjoy the video. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, then please give us a thumbs up. If you'd like to watch other videos of ours that YouTube thinks you'll like, then click up here. If you'd like to watch some other videos that we have in the same playlist, then click here. And obviously if you enjoyed the video, then we really appreciate if you gave us a subscription. And then obviously you'll be updated when other videos of ours go live, and you can do that quite easily by clicking here. Hope to see you soon.